Hello, welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. More reactions trail the Israeli strikes on Gaza, with the UN, EU, UK and Qatar condemning the attack. Large demonstrations of hostages' families pressuring the government to accept a ceasefire deal and bring the remaining hostages home. Plus, a manhunt is underway for an armed man after shooting dead 2 Australian police officers in Victoria. You're already here. Let's begin. Reactions are trailing Israel's double strikes on the Nasser hospital in Gaza, which left at least 20 people dead, including journalists. Qatar has accused Israel of trying to delay a peace deal. A spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry says a deal between Israel and Hamas is on the table, but whether Israel wants to respond is up to them. The European Commission has described the strikes as completely unacceptable, insisting that civilians and journalists must be protected under international law. French President Emmanuel Macron called the attacks intolerable, while the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy said he was horrified. Media freedom groups have also issued strong condemnations. Israel's defense forces claim troops struck a camera positioned on Hamas near the hospital, saying it was being used to monitor their movements. They maintain the strike was to remove what they described as a threat. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's security cabinet has just concluded a meeting. We'll be learning details of that in a minute. Local media reports say officials are set to approve the next phase of Israel's military operation in Gaza City, a move that has already drawn widespread international criticism. Amongst the many condemnations for the double strikes in Gaza City is the United Nations. Spokesperson for the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, strongly condemned the killings.
The Secretary General strongly condemns the killings of Palestinians today in Israeli strikes that hit Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. Those killed, in addition to civilians, included medical personnel and journalists. We want to extend our condolences to families and colleagues of those journalists killed, especially those representative of the Associated Press, Reuters, and Al Jazeera who are in this room or online. These latest horrific killings highlight the extreme risks that medical personnel and journalists face as they carry out their vital work amidst this brutal conflict. The Secretary General recalls that civilians, including medical personnel and journalists, must be respected and protected at all times. He calls for a prompt, impartial investigation into these killings. He reiterates that medical personnel and journalists must be able to perform their essential duties without interference, without intimidation, and without harm, and in full accordance with international humanitarian law. The Secretary General reiterates his call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, unfettered humanitarian access across Gaza, and for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages being held in Gaza.
Well, thousands of activists have joined hostage families for what they're calling a day of disruption, burning tires and blocking main roads ahead of another planned mass rally in Tel Aviv to demand the return of hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. The mother of one of the hostages accused the government of waging war in Gaza without a clear goal, while the father of another said that there'd been another deliberate torpedo operation of an agreement to bring back those held captives. Many members of the Hostages and Missing Families Forum say that they want President Donald Trump to help secure a ceasefire and hostage release deal, adding that more families should be expected later in several cities. Journalists have also been demonstrating at a protest in Brussels, in Belgium, to honor the memory of colleagues killed whilst reporting in Gaza. We do have joining us now, well, we'll be having him in minutes later, but perhaps this is where we should take a break on the program. Still ahead on The World Today, U.S. House investigating a request to documents, including a book containing personal messages for Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday. Join us again. Welcome back to the world. Today, Australia has given Iran's ambassador 7 days to leave the country after alleging the country's government directed anti-Semitic attacks in Sydney and in Melbourne. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced at a press conference earlier today that intelligence services linked Iran to an arson attack on a cafe in Sydney in October last year and another on a synagogue in Melbourne in December. Mr. Albanese added that the two incidents were attempts to undermine social cohesion and sow discord in the community. Ambassador Ahmed Sadeghi and 3 other officials have been ordered to leave Australia, which has withdrawn its own diplomats from Tehran. Iran has absolutely rejected the allegations.
Since the terrible events of October 7, 2023, we have witnessed a number of appalling anti-Semitic attacks against Australia's Jewish community. I've made it clear that these sorts of incidents have no place in Australia and that I wanted ASIO and the AFP to investigate as a priority. ASIO has now gathered enough credible intelligence to reach a deeply disturbing conclusion that the Iranian government directed at least 2 of these attacks. Iran has sought to disguise its involvement, but ASIO assesses it was behind the attacks on the Lewis Continental Kitchen in Sydney on October 20 last year and the Adass Israel Synagogue in Melbourne on December 6 last year. ASIO assesses it is likely Iran directed further attacks as well. These were extraordinary and dangerous acts of aggression orchestrated by a foreign nation on Australian soil. They were attempts to undermine social cohesion and sow discord in our community. It is totally unacceptable, and the Australian government is taking strong and decisive action in response. A short time ago, we informed the Iranian ambassador to Australia that he would be expelled. We have suspended operations at our embassy in Tehran, and all our diplomats are now safe in a third country. I can also announce the government will legislate to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. I've said many times that the Australian people want 2 things. They want killing in the Middle East to stop, and they don't want conflict in the Middle East brought here. Iran has sought to do just that. They have sought to harm and terrify Jewish Australians and to sow hatred and division in our community. The actions of my government send a clear message, a message to all Australians that we stand against anti-Semitism and we stand against violence.
Meanwhile, a manhunt is underway in Australia after 2 police officers were shot dead in the small alpine town of Porepunkah in Victoria State. Authorities say a 59-year-old detective and a 35-year-old senior constable were killed, while a 3rd officer is being treated for non-life-threatening injuries. The shooting happened early this morning when 10 officers went to an address in the town to execute a search warrant. Victoria Police said the suspect, who they described as heavily armed and dangerous, fled into the bush on foot. They added the situation is an active incident with dozens of police and emergency services now deployed to the scene, about 300 kilometers northeast of Melbourne. A victim of child sexual abuse has begged Elon Musk to stop links offering images of her abuse from being posted on his social media platform X. Zora, not her real name, lives in the United States and was abused for more than 20 years. Abused more than 20 years ago. She said, hearing that my abuse and the abuse of so many others is still being circulated and commodified here is infuriating. X has responded, saying it has zero tolerance for child sexual abuse material and that tackling offenders remains a top priority. Local media discovered images of Zora while investigating the global trade of child sex abuse material, estimated to be worth billions of dollars. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has accused Britain and France of collusion over the failure to stop migrant boats in the Channel. He pledged that a government led by him would detain and deport absolutely anyone who comes illegally. Speaking in Oxford today, Mr. Farage said Britain was witnessing two governments colluding in their support of criminal activity, alleging the French naval vessels escort migrant boats to UK waters. Mr. Farage promised that under his party, the UK would leave the European Convention on Human Rights, temporarily disapply the Refugee Convention, and introduce immediate detention and deportation for all illegal arrivals. Reform UK is currently topping the polls ahead of both Labour and the Conservative Party.
And I've been saying, of course, for a long time that it's a growing threat to our national security. And we've seen just recently some arrests made of people that came by boat and they are suspected of being involved in some form of terrorism. Huge numbers of undocumented young males who throw their passports and iPhone into the English Channel when they get to the 12-mile line, something that I've been out and filmed. These huge numbers of people do constitute a threat. And I suppose the growing anger in the country over the course of the last few weeks is a cultural one, in the sense that many of these young men come from countries in which women aren't even second-class citizens. And frankly, the public have now just had enough. And what began as a protest of mothers and concerned citizens outside the Bell Hotel in Epping has now spread right across the country. And all of it really poses one big fundamental question. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of women and children being safe on our streets? Or are you on the side of outdated international treaties backed up by a series of dubious courts? And even as we speak, despite the £800 million we've given the French, even as we speak, there are French naval vessels escorting these boats across to a 12-mile line where they'll be picked up by Border Force or our volunteers for the RNLI if it's a busy day and Border Force simply can't cope. And now what happens is the French give them all life jackets. And when they're picked up by Border Force give the life jackets back to the French so they can reuse them on the next journey. I mean, we're literally witnessing two governments colluding in their support of criminal activity. The only way we will stop the boats is by detaining and deporting absolutely anyone that comes via that route.
And as we end the program, a U.S. House panel investigating the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein has requested the release of documents from his estate, including a birthday book created for his 50th birthday. The subpoena, issued by James Comer, leader of the House Oversight Committee, expands the investigation into the disgraced late pedophile financier. Last month, the Wall Street Journal reported that the book, created in 2003 by Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell, included messages from Epstein's contacts, one alleged note bearing the name of President Donald Trump, which he disputed. The president said the alleged note was fake and began defamation proceedings against the journal's parent company and its owner, Rupert Murdoch. The company, Dow Jones, stood by its reporting and vowed to fight the legal case. And let's just quickly get to the president, national president, beg your pardon, of the Nigerian Association of Nigerian American Press Association, NAPA, Dr. George Otumu, who'll be discussing the attacks in Gaza that killed the 5 journalists at the hospital. Dr. Otumu, thank you for joining us on the program. Catching you pretty late, but we'll see what we can do. What are your thoughts on the fact that, journalists are being caught up in this crossfire and this war that's going on in Gaza? 2 weeks ago, there's about 4 journalists who were killed, and now 5.
Talking to me, it is devastating and it is painful because so far what Netanyahu has done right now is committed war crimes. I must tell you here that during armed conflicts, journalists are engaged in dangerous missions. They are being protected according to Geneva Conventions as civilians under international humanitarian law, meaning that under no circumstance, journalists cannot be targeted. As a matter of fact, journalists are protected by international human rights law from all abuses, including killing, torture, enforced disappearances, arbitrary investigation into attacks against them. As a matter of fact, all journalists, media professionals, and associated have the right of protection from all human rights violations and abuse, including killings, torture, enforced disappearance, all of them. As a matter of fact, to state it succinctly, Article 79 of the Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention says that journalists shall be considered as civilians and given the same protections as civilian war correspondents. They are attached to, even being attached to armed forces. If they are being captured, they have the same right as prisoners of wars as outlined in the third Geneva Convention. What Netanyahu has done so far is a gut. He has placed freedom of expression and protection of journalists in conflict under siege.
Right.
And he has broken
that we understand.
Oath of journalism.
Dr. Tumu, that we understand, the conventions, that protect journalists, especially in crisis situations. But what do you say to the Israeli government, which says that, some of these journalists are moonlighting as journalists, but they're really Hamas militants underneath?
That's not, I must tell you right now, that Netanyahu lied. The IDF lied. They are not saying the truth. They are not saying the truth because journalists, they have their true identification card on their chests. They have their helmet. They have their badges. They have their camera. In any war, they are civilians. They are not Hamas. IDF Netanyahu has a way of lying and misconstruing the truism of journalism. In warfield, he's not telling the truth. He's looking for a way. Have a way of calling a dog a bad name to hang it. That's what he's doing. What he has done is a war crime. The journalists are not terrorists. Journalism is not a crime. Journalism is alive. We love journalism. We practice journalism.
Dr. Tumu, we will have to revisit this at another time. We do apologize to you and to our viewers for bringing this conversation late in the day. But this is where we leave it on The World Today. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. And thanks again to everyone who joined us. I'm Amarachi Ubani.